Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. US President Donald Trump hails Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in Tokyo, welcoming her pledge to speed up Japan's military build-up and signed new trade and rare earth deals. Takaichi, a protege of Shinzo Abe, even vows to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, his spokeswoman says. President Trump says his upcoming summit with China's Xi Jinping in South Korea will be great for everybody as trade hopes rise after talks in Malaysia. He spoke at an event in Tokyo attended by top business leaders, including Apple CEO Tim Cook. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is open to peace talks but will not withdraw troops or surrender more territory, as Moscow demands. He supports a Trump-backed ceasefire on current lines with any summit to be held outside Russia or Belarus. Swedish Prime Minister has said Nordic leaders are confident of finding a solution to finance the Ukraine war at the next European Council meeting in December. The United Nations warns Hurricane Melissa will bring catastrophic damage as it hits Jamaica with 300 km/h winds, storm surges and deadly flooding. Authorities have ordered mandatory evacuations as the Category 5 storm, the island's worst this century, makes landfall. The European Union says it's deeply concerned by intensifying violence in Sudan following al-Fashir's capture by paramilitary forces. Brussels urges all sides to de-escalate and vows to document violations of international law, declaring there can be no impunity. Sudan's military chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, confirms the army has left its last stronghold in the city of al-Fashir after the RSF claimed control of the city. He says the retreat was approved to stop systemic destruction and killing of civilians amid the escalating conflict. A Kyrgyz court has labelled 3 leading independent news outlets as extremist organisations, blocking their websites weeks before snap parliamentary elections. The ruling against Klup, Dimitrov, Live and 88Ds marks an unprecedented crackdown on press freedoms in Kyrgyzstan. Now we start in the Middle East this hour, where as the tension between Hamas and Israel boils over following the ceasefire agreed in Egypt last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now alleged that Hamas have sent Israel remains of a person whose body has already been recovered by the IDF earlier. Netanyahu has claimed that Hamas have knowingly tried to mislead Israel and that this constitutes a violation of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The militant group has said it was complying with the ceasefire and doing its best to locate hostage remains, but was hindered by lack of equipment to identify bodies. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that he will huddle with his defense chiefs to decide on the next steps soon. Israel's Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir have both called on Netanyahu to take tough action against Hamas. We're now joined by Mati Zweig. He is a geopolitical expert and he joins us live from Israel. Mati, what are the options following these claims from Israel that the hostage returned has in fact already been returned and it is a violation of the ceasefire?
Well, hello, Thomas. I think that now the world has more and more clear that you have one part that has been fulfilling every point of the agreement, which is Israel, that redeployed the forces to what is called now a yellow line and also gave back all what promises, all the prisoners, the whole quantity of prisoners. Israel didn't hold 1,000 and give another 1,000 and say, if you don't give me, they gave everything, thinking that Hamas is in their interest to give back everybody. So they gave, yes, the alive ones, and also a little part of the deceased ones, but this is not what we were talking about. They know, and we have witnesses, because the people that is alive themselves from these last 20 and also from previous agreements, they know that Hamas exactly knows, and they have a lot of months to recollect bodies and to put them in every place. And they were very meticulous in this because they know they are the cards that they have in their hands to hold until there is an agreement. So maybe if you tell me there is one or two or three that they think they are in certain areas or under the rubble, etc., most of the deceased ones, they know what they are, and they are just lying. Why they are lying? Because they want to hold more time and going to see if they are going to expand their grip in all the areas that the IDF went out, and they can have the power again, seeing that even Trump at the beginning, he say, let them order between themselves. And now he's, all the advisors say Trump that this is not going to work in this way. Phase 2 is not going to start if they are not going to give all the deceased Israelis that they have in their holding, or most of them.
Now, Matti, of course, one of Israel's objectives of this war was to destroy Hamas after October the 7th. Of course, this has not been done. However, much of the Israeli public support an end to this war. Those who don't, of course, are that of some of Netanyahu's cabinet. Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir have both been vocal, have raised their vocal opposition to the ceasefire. However, another sticking point here is the remains of hostages that can't be located. 12 more hostages remain inside the Gaza Strip. How much pressure is Netanyahu under from said hostages' families that could push him towards a riskier military approach here?
In all the last 2 years, not only in the last 2 months, there were a lot of pressure from all the families of the alive and deceased hostages, and also from the entire society. I mean, not 100%, of course, but like 70% of everybody in all the surveys and also in the streets and also with giant manifestations, they were pushing, make a deal so everybody will come back and then we'll deal in the future with Hamas. Other things were having decisions in the government, especially from the pressure of the extremist ministers. It doesn't mean that the people is against destroying Hamas, because even Palestinians understand that Hamas is only an obstacle for peace. And there are other forces inside the Palestinian camp that can fulfill the place. So now what is going on is every day that Hamas doesn't give back most of the remains of the deceased bodies, is a good excuse for the extremist minister to push for another round, to say they are not fulfilling, go out with the army and try to conquer what you didn't conquer before.
Yes, Matti Zaweg, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of the West Asia region. Syrian President Ahmad Al-Sharaa has met with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud in the presence of Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Hassan Al-Shibani in Saudi Arabia. The meeting is part of President Al-Sharaa's official visit to the kingdom to participate in the 9th edition of the Future Investment Initiative Conference. During his visit, President Al-Sharaa will deliver a speech at the conference and hold meetings with leading international investment companies and economic institutions. The discussions will focus on opportunities for cooperation and regional economic growth. The visit underscores Syria's participation in one of the region's major investment events, bringing together global leaders, investors and policymakers to explore strategies for future economic development. Matti, when Donald Trump lifted the sanctions on Syria, he said he was giving Damascus a chance for greatness. Now, with Al-Sharaa in attendance at conferences like these, does it seem like this vision is coming to fruition?
Well, when he lifted the sanctions, they were not 100% of the sanctions. They are being lifted gradually. But anyway, of course, it's a much better situation than before. What happened in the interim is that the forces of Al-Sharaa, the Sunni ex-terrorists, that they identify a lot with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the past, and now they are part of the government. There were a dichotomy of decisions, and if they are going to continue to be a terrorist inside a legal government, or they are going to develop Syria for everybody. They choose until now something in between, attacking minorities like the Kurds, like the Druze, Kurds in the north, northeast, the Druze in the southeast, and also other minorities like in several places, Christians and Alawites, of course. But from the other side, they did elections, and they did kind of legislative elections to have a new parliament, which was especially formed by people of their own party, of the Sunnis, Muslim parties, and taking also some representation from kind of symbolic representations for some minorities. But the big picture is they are not really integrating, and they were threatening Druze and Kurds and other minorities, and it's a fragile unity. Is not a unity at all, or not a real will to have a united Syria like before the civil war. Now, anyway, everyone is trying good to Al-Sharaa, and he's, I think, for the third time already in Saudi Arabia, or twice, and once they were there in Damascus. And he met Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. He was with Foreign Minister Al-Shabani, and they were in something that they do every year in Saudi, that is the Future Investment Initiative Conference. And they are really, these are conferences which big money is involved in this. So he has a big choice to take the money for a real development of a united Syria, or to just take the money for their own purposes and living outside the minorities, which can be a big risk because of, for instance, the Druze in the south, they have been now trained and in a big cooperation with Israel, for instance. Kurds, they have a lot of course, relations with Iraq and with their Kurds brothers, and they are also under pressure from Turkey in the north, which is taking a big part in the recovery of Syria, economic recovery, but political too. So things are still fragile, but there is a possibility that the big money is going to make people settle down and have a better future.
Yes, thank you very much, Matti Zaweg, for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on over to Europe, and European Union leaders and leaders of the Nordic countries have expressed confidence that a financing agreement for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets can be reached by December of 2025. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing for the EU to give a go-ahead to the plan at a leaders' summit in December. The statements were made at the Nordic Council Summit in Stockholm. Under international law, sovereign assets cannot be confiscated, so the European Commission has put forward a plan to allow EU governments to use up to certain amount of assets without actually confiscating them. Thus far, Belgium remains the big holdout between the plan and its implementation, fearing that confiscating Russian assets to secure the loan could lead to legal challenges from Moscow. Given that the financial institution Euroclear is based in Brussels, Belgium could be left to shoulder the legal and financial liabilities of such lawsuits alone. Belgium's Prime Minister Bart de Wever has stated that his country would not agree to any such scheme unless a legal basis for such actions was presented by the committee. Let's listen in to what the leaders had to say.
Obviously, we didn't reach a conclusion last European Council, but we did take a major step, a necessary step, to be able to make that decision. And in this group, you can really count on that. We are very decisive on our will to make that decision on the European Council in December.
The war in Ukraine and Russia's reckless behavior at the Baltic Sea region have made our region a hotspot. This has changed our work in the European Union and our work amongst the Nordics. The small countries of this region know that we need to work together to be stronger. And this is what we have also discussed today.
Okay, we're now joined by Dimitri Simes Jr. He's the Sputnik India head, and he joins us live from the Russian capital of Moscow. Dimitri, of course, Nordic nations, especially Sweden, Norway, Finland and Denmark, have been the most per capita funders of Kiev, including, of course, the European Union. Is Moscow concerned that Europe as a whole continent, not just the US, is keeping Ukraine economically afloat?
Well, when it comes to the Europeans themselves, I think Russia understands that they have malicious intent and they want to drag on this conflict for as long as possible. But we also understand that Europe by itself can't keep the NATO proxy war in Ukraine going, because you look at European military industrial capabilities, they are minuscule without the United States. And even those weapon systems that they produce, they need a lot of components from the United States. And plus, overall, industrial production in Europe has gone down over the past few years, in large part due to its incredibly stupid and self-destructive decision to sanction affordable Russian oil, which by extension has made the entire cost of production for all of these weapons more expensive. Of course, there already are European troops, European mercenaries fighting in Ukraine, and Russian troops have no problem dealing with them. I guess, I want to comment about, specifically the news that you headlined as Schoenwood, and that is about the European proposal to illegally seize Russian assets and send them to Ukraine. Now, this would be the latest in the series of suicidal European economic decisions, because I want to break down for your viewers what exactly this would entail in practice. So you mentioned Euroclear, and Euroclear is the largest European settlement and clearance organization, and it's the organization that holds most of the Russian assets that were frozen after the start of the Ukraine conflict. Now, Euroclear has offices around the world, including in many global majority countries. So it has offices in Bahrain, it has offices in Hong Kong, so on and so forth. If the Europeans go through with seizing Russian assets, Russian lawyers can go to, let's say, Hong Kong or Bahrain or wherever else and sue Euroclear, not only to recover all of the assets that were seized, but to get some additional damages. And there's a very good chance that the Europeans would lose in court. And so that would open the door to basically Russia seizing Euroclear assets all across the world. And that's why the Belgians are really so reluctant to push through with the suicidal idea, because they understand that this is a Pandora box proposition that can bring the entire European financial system crumbling down.
Okay, and of course, it says that this deal can be reached by December of this year. How are officials in Moscow, economists in Moscow, feeling at the possibility of that coming in?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, I can assure you that Russian lawyers are, getting ready for that scenario, and that if the Europeans go through with this option, there's going to be a very tough battle in court that they will lose. The second point is that I would remind your audience members that there are hundreds and billions of dollars worth of European companies and assets that are still in Russia. Yes, despite all the sanctions, despite all the political condemnation, there are a lot of European businesses that have remained in Russia. And if the Europeans were to go through with seizing Russian assets, then Russia would be fully within its right to seize the assets of European companies in Russia. So regardless, Russia has more than enough options to make sure that the Europeans feel double the pain if they go through with this, with this strategy.
Okay, do stay with us, Dmitry. We have further news coming out of the region, where Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has called out Lithuania's decision to close border crossings with his country, calling it a crazy scam. Speaking in Moscow, Lukashenko accused the Western nations of waging a hybrid war against Belarus and Russia, saying Europe was entering a new era of barbed wire and closed skies. Lithuania moved to shut most border crossings after a series of balloons allegedly launched from Belarus crossed into its airspace, disrupting flights and raising security concerns. Lukashenko dismissed the accusations, saying Belarus had no interest in escalating tensions, and criticized Europe and the US for what he called absurd provocations against Minsk and Moscow. Okay, we are now once again joined by Dmitry Symes on this issue. Dmitry, of course, Belarus and Moscow remain close allies, and Lukashenko, Belarus's leader, accuses the West of a barbed wire hybrid war. What does that mean, and is Belarus preparing for confrontation here?
Well, Belarus most certainly is not preparing for confrontation. It's a nation with a population just over 9 million, which is less than a lot of major cities like, you can look at the major cities in China, and Belarus is less than that. Belarus doesn't want a conflict with anyone. It's a small country that has, throughout its history, tried to more or less maintain good relations with everyone, including the West, by the way. But what has happened is that you've seen the NATO countries, and especially Poland and Lithuania, adopt the position that they want to orchestrate regime change in Belarus. And, for your viewers, I think it's important to go back to 2020, when there were presidential elections in Belarus. Lukashenko won those elections. And in response, what you ended up seeing is that Poland and Lithuania began funding a massive regime change effort in Belarus. You saw that a lot of propaganda networks were set up not only on the territory of Poland and Lithuania, but they were financed by Polish and Lithuanian taxpayer dollars. And a lot of, radical opposition politicians were also being financed by Poland and Lithuania. Since then, you've seen a lot of Polish and Lithuanian politicians make provocative statements about how the Lukashenko government needs to be overthrown, including by force if necessary. You've seen, provocative mobilization of forces near the border with Belarus. And accordingly, Belarus is on its guard because, again, it's a small country. And so Belarus has responded by strengthening its military cooperation with Russia to make sure that, if God forbid the Poles or the Lithuanians were to attack, that Belarus would be able to defend its sovereignty.
Yes, and Dmitry, finally, how closely is Belarus linked to Moscow now?
Well, Belarus and Russia are part of what is called a common union state. So both Russia and Belarus have sovereign foreign policies, but the two countries are trying to pursue economic integration, akin to something along the European Union, but on a smaller scale. Again, this is not really an aggressive development. This is a, boosting people-to-people ties, boosting cultural, language, economic integration. And obviously, Belarus and Russia are close military allies because Belarus is a small country, and it helps for them to cooperate with Russia and to have that support. But I want to emphasize that, there's this sort of myth that Belarus is somehow Russia's puppet or something like that. That most definitely is not the case, because when you look at the foreign policy of Belarus, they're, strengthening cooperation across the board. They're strengthening cooperation with India, by the way. Belarus has made, great strides in strengthening cooperation with India. They have well-established ties with China. They're working more and more with African countries. They're working with Iran, Turkey, you name it. Belarus is a pretty, peace-loving, friendly country, so it has a lot of great relationships across the world. The only people it really doesn't get along with, again, are some of these more aggressive Eastern European NATO states that have their own sort of history of politically occupying Belarus, because I want to remind your viewers that the Poles invaded Belarus for over several hundred years, and Belarus was forcibly colonized by the Poles. So there is some history there. But even when you look at President Trump, even he has made it clear that he wants to have a normal relationship with Belarus. So when we see some of these hardline statements coming from Poland and Lithuania, I think it is important to keep in mind that they're global outliers and that for the most part, Belarus has great relations with everyone.
Yes, Dmitry Simes Jr., thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's been a pleasure to have you. We now move on for our final story of the hour, where Jamaica is bracing for what the World Meteorological Organization calls a catastrophic situation as Hurricane Melissa makes landfall. The storm is bringing gusts of more than 300 kilometers an hour, massive storm surges up to 4 meters, and rainfall that could exceed 70 centimeters, twice a typical rainy season. Flash floods and landslides are expected to strike hard. The International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies warn as many as 1.5 million people in Jamaica could be directly affected. More than 800 shelters have been set up as evacuees flee low-lying areas. Officials warn roofs will be tested, floodwaters will rise, and isolation will become a harsh reality. As the Category 5 storm sweeps in, this is likely to be the worst storm Jamaica has faced this century. Authorities urge everyone in vulnerable areas to seek shelter, move to higher ground, and stay indoors until the all clear. This is what Anne Claire has said.
In addition to the rain and to the destructive wind, you will have storm surge that is expected as well on the southern coast of Jamaica, with 3 to 4 meters high, in addition to destructive waves. So it's a catastrophic situation that is expected to be in Jamaica. It's a massive hurricanes heading towards Jamaica, and it would have a direct impact in the coming hours into Jamaica. So the winds for Jamaica is expected to reach about 280 kilometers per hour, with gusts picking up to 350 kilometers per hour.
And that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.